Hello and welcome to today's episode of Crypto My God. I'm on number 70, so hell yeah, I'm moving my way on up, getting a little more comfortable, and I hope that you've been enjoying as you tune in. I'd like to think I'm getting a little better. If you have any feedback for me, please hit me in the comments. I love to read it. Now, today, just a little bit of news, a little updates, a little opinioning. Let's get into it. Very quickly, I want to talk a little bit about the buy side of the cryptocurrency market. If you followed along with previous episodes, you've heard me give a lot of really call outs of fear around where do our next buyers come from. And this is sort of a mix between the high FTV, venture-backed, expensive coins that are just doing down and to the right only, where the money is being made on perpetuals and on shorts. But again, that's not really retail people just opening up their phone and smashing a buy button like we've got to support previous cycles. And when we look at the meme coin trades, that did onboard a lot of people that just wanted to take that gamble. But again, meme coins also ended up in the dumpers. And this is not uncommon for us. We've seen the rise of the L1 coins in the ICO era. We've seen the rise of NFTs in 2019, 2020. We've seen the meme coin cycle go through. So we do generally pick a tier. And how could I forget about the metaverse, right? And metaverse land grab. That was a major cycle, and I even know a fund that raised $10 million just to purchase metaverse land. So we do have these consistent buy-side cycles, but we don't seem to have anything like holding on right now. We're kind of back in an infrastructure play where the infrastructure is so solid and successful that we're really fighting between Ethereum and Solana as to where the applications come, but we're not seeing many of those apps. Anyway, this is a long drawn out way to say, where is buy side coming from? I feel that retail's been hurt. The new token launches aren't doing very well, and there's not a lot of incentive to reach out to your buddies and say, hey, get in on crypto. It's going to make you a ton of money. And what we're seeing now is an interesting pivot to these publicly traded companies like MicroStrategy, which is using a traded asset to acquire cryptocurrency on their balance sheet as a form of treasury. So with that being said, we had an announcement coming out this week that Cantor Fitzgerald is teaming up with Tether and SoftBank for a $3.6 billion crypto venture. Now let's dive into this a little bit. Cantor is actually Howard Lutnick's firm, so we do have a tie into the current admin. Surprise, surprise. Tether is just so successful. I mean, they print cash. They may as well be redeploying and doing whatever they can to help the industry, right? So they make so much money. They make sense as a buy side. And then, of course, SoftBank, they are very bleeding edge early stage investors in tech. They've been big in all of the things I've mentioned, from NFT to metaverse to AR, VR, all of these things, and crypto for a very long time. So the three of them together, I mean, it's not the craziest thing in the world. And they're calling upon Jack Mallers, CEO of Strike, who is a very young, very exuberant Bitcoin maxi founder. For anyone that doesn't know, Strike is basically trying to make Bitcoin into what the original promise was, which is a currency on the internet, peer-to-peer, safe, decentralized, the whole shebang. So it does make a bit of sense that they choose him to represent this new company that is going to go after Michael Saylor's claim to the throne on building this Bitcoin treasury. That being said, we now have MicroStrategy. We're going to have this new platform. They are going to be providing buy-side pressure to Bitcoin. And of course, as it's worked for Bitcoin, other people in the ecosystem are beginning to wake up. So we have the same strategy being played out here by a Solana firm. They're calling themselves Sol Strategies, right? A very large departure from MicroStrategy. And their idea is to create a similar sort of company that can issue shares. And remember, shares can be almost infinitely issued as long as there's a buying demand to buy these assets. Now, I did see the counter to the Bitcoin purchasing from Jack Mallers, because Jack is known for saying, why buy something that another man can print? You should buy Bitcoin a hard money. And there is some irony that he is now selling a share that he can print infinitely to buy Bitcoin. And you can take what you will with that. Now with Solana, they're basically coming at this as a validator underneath this company wrapper. So they're going to be issuing shares, issuing debt in order to purchase Solana and run it as a validator. Now, there's a couple interesting things here. And they've managed to pull one of the lead technology officers from Kraken, so you do have a pretty substantial team operating this thing. However, something to note, unlike Bitcoin, Solana does produce yield. Of course, natively holding Solana without staking it, you actually get inflated to kingdom come. The Solana inflation is very heavy because it is very expensive to run a Solana validator. So Is this good for a general SOL holder? It's hard to say. They're going to be adding a lot of buy pressure on the spot markets to Solana, but at the same time, they're probably going to be looking to do something with all of the inflated SOL that they earn for staking. This is certainly going to be interesting to see. Does it work with proof of stake as well as it works with proof of work on Bitcoin? This is probably not the last that we see of this company's strategy. However, we are seeing an entirely new format of buy side arise in which it's institutions, and if they produce profitable yield or whatever, then people can always buy the shares of these. So it's like almost a managed fund, and it's a weird approach. Now, on to a very different topic. I want to talk about something that is coming out of the NFT wave, and to me is very concerning and a really loud scream for why decentralization matters. So as we take a journey back to 2021, we have this awesome event where Nike acquired NFT fashion company Artifact Studios. Now, this was when the metaverse was really big in conversation, and Artifact is a very cool team. So they work with Takashi Murakami and created all of these what are called CloneXs. They're sort of the inception NFT that this launch brought up. Then they began to merge CloneX with a lot of like street drip and just cool stuff. So CloneX got into making shoes. They're kind of a clothing brand as well. And Nike saw this and said, hey, we need some exposure to the digital world. Just really quickly, let's see. It looks like of the 16,000 CloneX avatars revealed by the community, the cheapest one at launch was 5.5 ETH or $20,000. So they raised a lot of money around this CloneX sale, and Artifact was looking like a very viable company for this concept of like digital goods, digital drip, all that fun stuff. However, lately, announced last year, end of 2024, Nike decides to close Artifact operations by January 2025. And we can see a lot of the Artifact shoes up here. Now, it's not super shocking. I happen to know somebody that worked at Nike who was a sneaker designer, and suddenly he was pivoted to designing digital shoes. And his take, and I'm sure this echoed a lot on his team, was like, yo, I didn't get into this to design digital shoes. Like, I want to make real shoes. So with the NFT bubble kind of popping and the metaverse being a very slow tick, even with, Facebook's change to Meta, like, this is kind of par for the course. However, what's truly brutal is that all of those CloneXs that were designed, right, they were not hosted on a decentralized storage server. And I've covered this in my previous posts. So what we're starting to see now in what I think is one of the biggest kick in the balls in crypto history is that the art is starting to disappear. So here you can see all the CloneXs, and I mean, they're kind of fun. They're a little crazy. If you're a Murakami guy, I guess you like the aesthetic. I always thought they were a little wishy-washy, but look, this is starting to happen. And what is going on? The content has been restricted using Cloudflare's basic service in this manner, violation of. So the long and the short of it is that somewhere along the lines, it looks like Nike didn't pay this bill, and now the art is beginning to disappear. And that is disconcerting. This is why we want any sort of asset to be stored on an impermanent anti-fragile storage unit like IPFS, Interplanetary File System, or Swee's new Walrus, something I've talked about relatively recently. Of course, Arweave is like a small fee up front for what we looked at was like 20 plus years. Was it 200 years? I mean, it's a very long-term storage solution. So this is something that we need to consider as we do begin to move assets on chain, which is if they are represented by a token, what legal rights does that token holder have? Do they actually own the asset itself? Is the coin tied to a more permanent anti-fragile storage system that's going to stay up and running for a very long time? Unlike all of these solutions, Bitcoin ordinals, for example, are actually baked into the Bitcoin blockchain. So a Bitcoin NFT will be around for as long as the Bitcoin network is. And that's why they're kind of fun and they create a little unique asset. But when we're looking at broader NFTs, we need to know, are these things being stored on a private server? Because you could just rug us and the whole thing would disappear. And of course, people are waking up, this is a bit of a jest, but like imagine spending 1.25 million on a rare NFT, come back 3 years later and the image is just gone. And this is a call out for the industry to pound their chest and say decentralization is important. I know as we move up the application layer, People might just want to trade. They might want that quick hit of dopamine. But if we're going to build stuff that lasts, it has to be in a decentralized format. And of course, this is why I keep harkening back to the SEC, because they are laying the ground rules for the safe harbor, which means how do you start a company, which is obviously centralized, and move to decentralization. The safe harbor period of about 3 years is a grace period by the regulators to say, hey, we're giving you 3 years to make this transition. If you don't do it by the end, you're going to be a registered security. You need KYC. What that really does mean is anyone that tries to create a protocol that does revenue share, which is the greatest thing a protocol can do, is to be an autonomous business that shares its profits with its participants. Well, if you don't decentralize within that 3-year safe harbor period, you're going to be a security. If you share those revenues, you need KYC AML. You can't participate in like DEXs, the whole shebang, right? There's a very big offering behind decentralization. And last but not least, the SEC is also going to provide what is decentralization, right? By the end of those 3 years, what are the checkboxes that you need to hit? And to me, that is going to be one of the biggest advantages that we can get, because founders are very good at knowing what they need to do and executing on that. The problem that crypto has had is that there is no way for a founder to know what they need to do, and therefore they were unable to execute. This led to kind of a feedback loop of laziness, frankly, where people were like, well, decentralization doesn't matter because it's not a real tangible thing in the eyes of the law, so I may as well forego it. I may as well just create centralized shit apps and try to get as much money as possible. The alternative to that was I may as well lean into meme coins because they're baseless, they have no third party generating revenue, and yada, yada, yada. So there is a lot of value that we can get from this new wave of regulation that is very exciting and very thrilling. Of course, we're having it at the same time as all of the scams. So we'll see how this really leaves the brand of crypto at the end of the day. But my hopes is that eventually it all kind of fades into the background and we just see this as the digitization of anything that involves value, ownership, stuff like that. And I think we're well positioned for that. So the long tail view of crypto, very, very good, and only gets stronger and stronger the more the regulators actually create good, healthy regulation. So with that being said, I hope you're not going too hard in the CloneX markets these days. As always, good luck, stay safe out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.